Driven apart by a mother's interference, a young couple's lives shatter. Years later, a letter containing just one word opens the door to a potential reconciliation, revealing a long-hidden secret and the possibility of a new beginning for a fractured family.
Welcome to the Important Stories channel. If you like my story, give me a like and subscribe. It's important to me, and we continue.
The door slammed shut loudly, so much so that the glasses in the old sideboard, which Rosie loved to look at, rattled. She stood on the doorstep of her mother-in-law, Isabella's, house, clutching a thin knitted shawl, a gift from her mother last Christmas. The autumn wind pierced her to the bone. Rosie looked up at the illuminated windows of the house where laughter had echoed just moments before. Her laughter. Her husband, Liam's, laughter. Now there was only silence. A heavy, oppressive silence, like a tombstone lowered onto their shared future. Inside the house, a storm raged, a storm orchestrated by one woman, Isabella. A woman who believed her life experience was the only true compass for everyone around her, a woman whose opinion, delivered in an uncompromising tone, was always perceived as indisputable law. "I can't take it anymore, Liam." Isabella's voice trembled with indignation. She stood in the center of the living room, hands on her hips, looking at Rosie with undisguised animosity. This woman has absolutely no idea how to run a household. The house is always a mess, her cooking is atrocious, and frankly, her behavior is provocative. You must be completely blind if you can't see she's not right for you. Liam stood beside Rosie, his shoulders slumped. His face expressed a painful mixture of shame and helplessness. Theodore silently observed the scene from his favorite armchair in the corner of the room, his gaze fixed on the carpet as if searching for answers to his tormenting questions. "Mum, how can you say such things?" "Rosie is my wife, and I love her," Liam replied quietly, trying to put his arm around Rosie's trembling shoulders. "Love? You're blind, son, completely blind. She's using you, can't you see? She came into our home and is trying to impose her own rules here. Not while I'm alive." Isabella took a step forward, her eyes flashing. "I told you back when you first brought her to meet us, she's not from our circle. And I was right." "Isabella, please calm down," Theodore finally spoke, but his words sounded hesitant, as if he himself didn't believe they would be heard. Isabella didn't even glance at her husband. Her attention was entirely focused on Rosie. "And you," she turned to Rosie, her voice cold and contemptuous. "Did you think you could take root here? That I would let you destroy my family? You're deeply mistaken. My son deserves better. Much better. So I'm telling you straight, you have 1 week. 1 week to gather your things and disappear from our lives. And the sooner you do it, the better it will be for everyone. For my son, for me, and maybe even for you." Rosie remained silent, her head bowed. Tears choked her, but she tried not to show her weakness in front of this domineering woman. "Mum, you have no right to do this," firmness sounded in Liam's voice for the first time, but Isabella merely sneered contemptuously. "I do. I'm your mother, and I know what's best for you. And you're just blinded by your passion. But it will pass. You'll see. And she's superfluous here. An outsider. And she has to leave." Theodore sighed and rose from his chair. He went to his wife and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Isabella, let's go talk," he said quietly, but she sharply shrugged off his hand. "I have nothing to talk to you about, Theodore. Everything has already been said. That woman has to leave. And she will leave. In a week. I don't want to see her in this house." Rosie raised her eyes and looked directly at Isabella. There was no pleading or hatred in her gaze. "All right," Rosie said quietly. "I'll leave." She pulled her hand away from Liam's and walked out of the room without looking back. Liam rushed after her, but Isabella stopped him with a commanding gesture. "Leave her. Let her go. It's the best decision for all of us." Liam froze, torn between his love for his wife and his lifelong habit of obeying his mother. Theodore silently watched the scene, his face expressing deep sorrow. Rosie stepped out into the cold autumn street. The door slammed shut behind her with a deafening bang, cutting her off from her past life. She stood on the threshold of a stranger's house, feeling utterly alone and lost. In her hands, she clutched only the thin shawl that couldn't warm her frozen heart. 10 years had passed since that day. After that girl, Rosie, slammed the door and left, a ringing silence fell in the house. I stood in the middle of the living room, feeling a hurricane raging inside me. Rage, resentment, some strange, gnawing feeling of anxiety. Theodore silently watched me from his armchair. His eternal silence and detachment sometimes annoyed me more than any reproaches. He never knew how to truly support me. He always hid behind his newspaper or book when conflict brewed in the house, as if it didn't concern him too. As if he lived in some quiet little world of his own, where I had no access. Satisfied, he finally asked hoarsely, without raising his eyes. Satisfied? Do you even need to ask? I got rid of that little flirt of our son's. She was just twisting him around her little finger. Didn't you see? The way she looked at him? All fake. She loved him, Val, Theodore said quietly. His calm tone only added fuel to the fire of my rage. Loved him? What does he know about love? He's lived his whole life with me because that's what was expected, because I was a convenient wife, a good housekeeper, the mother of his son. But did he truly love me? I often doubted it. She loved his wallet. And our house. You're just a naive old man, Theo, you can't see beyond your nose. Liam stood by the window, turned away from us. I saw his shoulders trembling. My boy. My own flesh and blood. How could he be so blind? How could he not see that that woman wasn't his equal? Mum, why are you doing this? Liam finally spoke, his voice sounding muffled and desperate. Why? Because, son, I want what's best for you. I want you to be happy. And you won't find happiness with her. Believe me, I know what I'm saying. I've lived my life. You don't know, Mum. You don't know anything. Liam turned sharply to me, and for the first time in a long time I saw anger in his eyes. Real, masculine anger. It scared me. My quiet, obedient boy had suddenly rebelled against me. That girl had managed to turn him against his own mother. Don't you dare talk to me like that. I raised my voice. I'm your mother. I dedicated my whole life to you. And you're ready to trade me for that. Enough. Theodore roared, raising his voice for the first time in years. Liam and I looked at him in surprise. His face was red, and something I had never seen before flickered in his eyes. Enough, Val. You're crossing all the lines. It's his life. His choice. And you have no right to interfere like this. I was taken aback. Theodore had never spoken to me in that tone before, never contradicted me. What had happened to him? That girl had influenced everyone so much. Are you on her side? I asked my husband bitterly. I'm on our son's side, Isabella. He's an adult and has the right to decide for himself who he wants to be with. And your selfishness is only pushing him away. Those words fell on me like an icy shower. Selfishness? I had always thought I was doing everything for him, for our family. Could I have been wrong? Could my care, my protectiveness, have been just a manifestation of my domineering nature? Liam left the room in silence, slamming the door behind him. Theodore sighed heavily and sank back into his armchair. I remained standing in the middle of the living room, feeling completely broken and misunderstood. Conflicting feelings warred within me. On one hand, I was sure I had done the right thing, protecting my son from an unworthy woman. On the other hand, for the first time in a long time, I felt guilty. Guilty towards Liam. Guilty towards Theodore. And even towards that Rosie. But pride wouldn't let me admit my mistake. I kept telling myself that I had done what I had to do, that sooner or later Liam would understand I was right. Days, weeks, months passed. Liam became withdrawn and silent. He came home late, barely spoke to me, avoided my gaze. Theodore also distanced himself. A heavy atmosphere of silence settled in the house. I felt something collapsing, something very important and precious. But my pride, my stubborn conviction in my own righteousness, wouldn't let me take the first step towards reconciliation. I continued to wait, waiting for Liam to come to his senses and return to me, return to his old life. But time went on, and nothing changed. A voice inside me whispered that perhaps I had been wrong after all, that perhaps my love for my son had taken on an ugly form of selfishness and possessiveness. But admitting that to myself was agonizingly difficult. It was much easier to continue blaming Rosie, blaming her for destroying my family, blaming her for my son drifting away from me. 10 years passed like that. 10 years of silence and resentment, 10 years that changed all of us, 10 years that were perhaps irretrievably lost. And then that letter arrived. A letter from Liam. One short word, sorry. That word, like a ray of light in utter darkness, suddenly illuminated my soul. Forgive me? What is he asking forgiveness for? For loving? Or is he asking forgiveness for the pain I caused him? For the first time in a long time, a faint feeling of hope stirred in my heart that not all was lost. Perhaps we could be a family again. That letter made me reconsider the situation through my son's eyes, through the eyes of that young woman I had so ruthlessly driven from our home. And for the first time in 10 years, a sharp pang of regret pierced my heart. Over the years, Liam had become a different person. Initially, he rarely visited his parents. He would come, sit at the table, eat a little, answer formal questions, and quickly leave, avoiding her gaze. But after a while, he completely ignored these visits and any communication with his mother. Theodore, too, seemed to withdraw, immersing himself in his books and newspapers. Isabella took the letter in her hands and recalled that evening of the argument in minute detail. The rage that had blinded her then now seemed foreign, almost insane. She saw before her Rosie's tear-stained face, Liam's bewildered look, and the weary despair in her husband's eyes. Theodore entered the kitchen. He looked older and tired. The wrinkles around his eyes had deepened, and the hair at his temples had turned completely white. He silently walked to the window and gazed out at the fading autumn garden. "A letter from Liam," Isabella said quietly, placing the envelope on the table. Theodore slowly turned. His gaze was somewhat detached, as if he had long since ceased to be surprised by anything. "What does he write?" "One word. Sorry." Silence descended upon the room once more. Each of them was lost in their own thoughts. 10 years of resentment and silence stood between them like an impenetrable wall. Maybe this is a chance," Theodore finally said, his voice sounding uncertain. Isabella shuddered. A chance for what? To bring back the past? To make everything as it was before? She knew that was impossible. Too much pain had been inflicted. But deep down, despite all her pride, she felt a faint, barely perceptible glimmer of hope, a hope that this letter was the first hesitant step towards reconciliation. That evening, Isabella sat by the window for a long time, looking out at the dark garden. She remembered her younger years, her love for Theodore, Liam's birth. She had always wanted only the best for her son. But perhaps her idea of the best had been wrong. Perhaps, in her blind maternal love, she had stifled his own will, not allowed him to be happy in his own way. Tears welled up in her eyes for the first time in a long time. Somewhere far away lived her son, whom she had once driven from home. Somewhere lived that young woman she had so disliked. And in the midst of it all stood she, Isabella, with a broken heart and a bitter realization of her mistakes. The next morning, Isabella made a decision. She had to reply to Liam. She had to try to understand what had happened during those 10 years. She had to at least try to atone for her guilt. She sat at the kitchen table and took a clean sheet of paper. Her hand trembled. What should she write? How could she begin this letter after so many years of silence? For a long time, she sat staring at the blank page. Fragments of phrases, memories, regrets swirled in her head. Finally, she took a deep breath and began to write a letter to her son. Isabella's letter to Liam was short and restrained. She didn't pour out her soul or try to justify herself. She simply wrote that she had received his letter and would like to meet. She suggested a neutral place, a small cafe on the outskirts of town, where they sometimes used to go when Liam was still a teenager. She sent the letter registered mail, with a return receipt, and lived for several days in tense anticipation. Theodore watched her anxiety silently, only occasionally casting sympathetic glances at her. Finally, the notification arrived. The letter had been delivered. Isabella's heart grew even more uneasy. Now there was no way to postpone this meeting. She was about to see Liam after almost 10 years of silence. What had he become? Would she be able to bear his gaze, possibly full of reproach and resentment? On the day of the meeting, she arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early and sat at a table by the window. The rain drummed monotonously against the glass, creating a sense of detachment from the outside world. She nervously twisted a napkin, glancing at the entrance door every now and then. Time dragged on agonizingly slowly. There were few customers in the cafe. A few elderly couples were having quiet conversations, a young woman was reading a book while sipping coffee. And every person who entered made Isabella's heart skip a beat. Finally, the door opened, and Liam walked into the cafe. He was wearing a simple jacket and jeans. He had changed a lot in 10 years. Early gray hairs appeared in his hair, and a certain weariness, which hadn't been there before, lay in his eyes. He looked older than his age. Noticing her, he stopped for a moment, as if hesitating to approach. Then he slowly walked towards her table. "Hello, Mum," he said quietly, his voice sounding unusually hoarse. "Hello, Liam," Isabella replied, feeling a lump rising in her throat. They looked at each other in silence for a few seconds. Tension hung in the air, as if that invisible wall of resentment and unspoken words still stood between them. Liam sat down opposite her. The waitress approached and took their order. They fell silent again, not knowing how to begin this difficult conversation. "Thank you for the letter," Liam finally said, breaking the silence. "Thank you for coming," Isabella replied. The coffee arrived. They took a sip in silence, avoiding each other's eyes. "How are you? How are things?" Isabella asked uncertainly. "Fine," Liam replied curtly. "Working. Living." "How's Rosie?" The question was difficult for her to utter. Liam raised his eyes for a moment and looked at his mother. A shadow of pain flickered in his gaze. "We're not together anymore, Mum. Not for a long time." Liam sighed and set his coffee cup down. "It didn't work out, Mum. I guess we were too different. Maybe you were right." Isabella felt her heart clench painfully. She had been right? But at what cost? The cost of her son's loneliness? The cost of their 10-year separation? "I'm sorry, Liam," she said quietly. "Me too, Mum." Silence fell again. The rain continued to beat monotonously against the window, as if counting the lost time. "I wanted to say, forgive me, Liam," Isabella finally said, struggling to find the words. "I was too controlling. Too selfish. I thought I knew what was best for you, but I was wrong. I drove Rosie away. I destroyed your family. I'm so sorry. The tears she had held back for so long finally streamed down her face. She covered her face with her hands and wept from pain, from remorse, from the realization of her mistakes. Liam stood up silently and walked over to her. He gently touched her shoulder. Mum, it's all in the past. Don't cry. Isabella raised her tear-stained face and looked at her son. There was no reproach in his eyes, only sympathy and a kind of weary tenderness. I missed you so much, Liam, she whispered. I missed you too, Mum. So much. At that moment, the very wall that had separated them for 10 long years seemed to crumble. Liam told her about his life after his separation from Rosie, how difficult the breakup had been, how he had tried to lose himself in work, but loneliness had haunted him everywhere. Isabella listened in silence, painfully aware that her pride had caused her only son so much suffering. One day, Liam unexpectedly suggested that he and Theodore come to the dacha, which they hadn't visited since that fateful day. Isabella was initially taken aback. She was afraid of this meeting, afraid of reliving the past, afraid of seeing unspoken reproaches in her son's and husband's eyes. The day of their arrival was sunny and warm. Isabella had been bustling around the house since morning, trying to create a cozy atmosphere. She had washed the windows, placed Liam's favorite apple pies on the table, and picked a bouquet of wildflowers. When the car pulled up to the gates, her heart beat faster. She went out onto the porch and saw them. Liam looked a little tense, but a hesitant smile lit up his eyes. Theodore nodded to her in greeting. The first few minutes were awkward. They walked into the house in silence, looking around as if they were strangers in their own home. But gradually the tension eased. They talked over lunch, reminiscing about funny incidents from the past, joking, and sharing news. For the first time in a long time, Isabella felt truly happy. After lunch, Liam suggested a walk in the garden. Isabella noticed how her son had aged, how wisdom and a kind of quiet sadness had appeared in his eyes. Mum, I wanted to ask you something, Liam suddenly said, stopping. Isabella tensed up. She felt that something important was about to happen. Yes, Liam? Did you ever try to find out how Rosie was doing after all that happened? She had never been interested in Rosie's life. She had tried to erase her from her memory like an unpleasant episode. No, Liam. I didn't try. Liam sighed. You were wrong, Mum. She went through a lot. I'm sorry, Isabella said quietly, though deep down she still felt a dull irritation at the mention of Rosie's name. She never spoke badly of you, Mum. Not even after everything you did. She just left and tried to move on with her life. And did she succeed? I don't know, Mum. We haven't seen each other in a long time. But I know it hurt her a lot. At that moment, Isabella suddenly felt a pang of conscience. She pictured a young woman, alone in a strange city, without the support of her loved one, without understanding from his family. And for the first time, she looked at Rosie not as a rival, but as an ordinary person who had been hurt. Maybe we should try to find her? Isabella said, surprising herself. Liam looked at her in astonishment. Are you serious, Mum? Yes, Liam. I think I owe her an apology. A faint smile appeared on Liam's face. I think she'd be glad to hear from you, Mum. At that moment, Isabella felt the heavy burden of years of resentment begin to lift from her shoulders. Isabella's decision to find Rosie became a turning point. Liam helped his mother with the search. It turned out that after leaving, Rosie had moved to another region and managed to rebuild her life. After several weeks of searching, Liam found a trace of her in a small, cozy town. She had her own little flower shop. Isabella hesitated for a long time before meeting her. The fear of the unknown, of a possible cold reception, held her back. But the feeling of guilt and the desire to at least try to atone for the past were stronger. One morning, she got into her car and drove to that very town. Liam couldn't go with her, an important business trip. Theodore silently nodded goodbye, hope visible in his eyes. Isabella found Rosie's flower shop without difficulty. A beautiful sign with the name Pansies and a window full of bright bouquets created a feeling of warmth and harmony. A woman stood behind the counter. Rosie. She looked happy. A calm light shone in her eyes, and a soft smile played on her lips. A man stood beside her, gently holding her hand. He looked reliable and kind. Isabella entered the shop. A small bell above the door jingled softly. Rosie raised her eyes and looked at the elderly woman who had entered with surprise. "Hello," Isabella said quietly, feeling a lump rising in her throat. "Hello," Rosie replied, her gaze calm and friendly. The man beside her looked on with polite curiosity. "Rosie, it's me. Isabella." Recognition flashed in Rosie's eyes, but there was no trace of resentment or anger, only slight surprise. The man beside her squeezed her hand supportively. "Isabella. What a surprise. I wanted to talk to you, Rosie. If you have time." Rosie nodded and smiled at the man. "Honey, could you watch the flowers for a minute?" The man nodded and kissed her cheek. Rosie invited Isabella into a small back room behind the shop. They sat down at a simple table filled with flower pots. "It's been a long time," Isabella began, trying to keep her voice steady. "Yes," Rosie replied calmly. 10 years. A lifetime. Liam, he told me about you. About where you are." Rosie nodded. "I'm glad he's doing well." "Rosie, I came to ask for your forgiveness. For everything. For the pain I caused you. I was wrong. My pride, it blinded me. I'm so sorry." Rosie looked at her with a soft sadness. "The past is in the past, Isabella. I got married. This is my husband, Victor. He's a very good man." At that moment, a boy of about 9 peeked into the room. Fair hair, blue eyes. Isabella recognized Liam's features in him. "Mum, who's this?" the boy asked, looking curiously at the unfamiliar guest. This? This is an old friend, Maxim. Say hello." "Hello," the boy said, a little shy. Isabella looked at the child, and her heart clenched with a sudden realization. "Your son? Maxim. Is he Liam's son?" Rosie nodded, her gaze calm and open. Victor put his arm around her shoulders. "Yes. Victor knows all about him. He loves Maxim as his own." Isabella felt her cheeks flush with shame. She had caused this woman so much pain, and yet she had found her happiness and raised a wonderful child. "Rosie, I didn't know. Liam didn't know either. I didn't see the point in telling him. I wanted to start a new life. And Victor helped me do that." Isabella looked at Victor. In his eyes, she saw warmth and understanding. "You've made Rosie happy. I can see that." Victor smiled. "She deserves happiness. And so does Maxim." Isabella looked at Rosie again. "I'm happy for you. Truly happy. And I wanted to ask if you would allow me to see Maxim. If you don't mind." Rosie paused for a moment, then looked at Victor, who nodded encouragingly. "All right, Isabella. Maxim is my son, but he's also your grandson. If he wants to, you can see him." At that moment, Isabella felt an enormous sense of relief. Not everything was lost. She had a chance to get to know her grandson, a chance to atone at least a little for her guilt towards Rosie. "Thank you, Rosie. Thank you so much." Isabella's first meeting with Maxim took place in the same flower shop. Rosie remained calm, but her hidden tension was palpable. Victor stood beside her, radiating confidence and support. Maxim was shy at first, hiding behind his mother's skirt, but curiosity got the better of him, and he looked at his unfamiliar grandmother with interest. Isabella brought a small gift, an old wooden toy that had once belonged to Liam as a child. Maxim accepted it cautiously but soon became engrossed in examining the carved figures. Isabella tried to be casual, talking about Liam's childhood and showing photographs. But her relationship with Rosie remained cool. She was polite but kept her distance. The pain of the past was still evident in her eyes. One day, Isabella invited Rosie, Victor, and Maxim to her home. Theodore was very happy to meet his grandson. He looked at Maxim for a long time, finding more and more similarities to Liam as a child. Chapter 7. Isabella's first meeting with Maxim took place in the same flower shop. Rosie remained calm, but her hidden tension was palpable. Victor stood beside her, radiating confidence and support. Maxim was shy at first, hiding behind his mother's skirt, but curiosity got the better of him, and he looked at his unfamiliar grandmother with interest. Isabella brought a small gift, an old wooden toy that had once belonged to Liam as a child. Maxim accepted it cautiously but soon became engrossed in examining the carved figures. Conversation was stilted. Isabella tried to be casual, talking about Liam's childhood and showing photographs. Rosie answered monosyllabically, and Victor politely kept the conversation going. It felt like the past still stood between them like an invisible wall. When it was time to say goodbye, Maxim unexpectedly hugged Rosie's leg and quietly asked, "Mom, will she come again?" Rosie looked at Isabella, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "If Grandma wants to, Maxim," she replied. Isabella felt a pang of hope. More meetings followed. Isabella visited the flower shop, bringing Maxim books and sweets. The boy gradually got used to her, becoming more open. He told her about his schoolwork and his hobbies. Isabella listened intently, trying to make up for lost years. But her relationship with Rosie remained cool. She was polite but kept her distance. The pain of the past was still evident in her eyes. Victor was always there, as if protecting her and Maxim from any emotional upheaval. One day, Isabella invited Rosie, Victor, and Maxim to her home. Theodore was very happy to meet his grandson. He looked at Maxim for a long time, finding more and more similarities to Liam as a child. The atmosphere at lunch was tense. Isabella tried to create a relaxed setting, but the feeling of guilt wouldn't leave her. Rosie was quiet, and Victor kept the conversation going. After lunch, Maxim wanted to look at old photographs. Isabella took out the family album. Maxim looked at the pictures with interest, asking questions. In one of the photos was a little Liam holding the very same wooden toy. Maxim looked at it in surprise. "Is that Uncle Liam?" "And that's my toy." Isabella nodded, feeling a lump rising in her throat. Rosie took the album and looked closely at Liam's photograph. Sadness flickered in her eyes. Victor gently touched her hand. In the evening, after Rosie, Victor, and Maxim left, Isabella felt drained. She understood that her path to forgiveness would be long and difficult. She had caused too much pain, and healing those wounds wouldn't be easy. Liam, upon learning about Maxim, was shocked. For a long time, he couldn't believe he had a son he knew nothing about. He wanted to meet Rosie and Maxim immediately, but Isabella asked him to wait. Several months passed. Isabella regularly visited Maxim. She saw how the boy was becoming attached to her, how his smile brightened when she appeared. But there was still no emotional closeness with Rosie. One day, Isabella went to the flower shop and found Rosie upset, tears in her eyes. "What's wrong, Rosie?" she asked worriedly. "Victor has serious health problems," Rosie replied quietly. "He needs surgery." Isabella felt her heart clench with sympathy. Victor had become almost family to her during this time. She saw how much he loved Rosie and Maxim. "How can I help?" she asked sincerely. Rosie looked at her with unexpected gratitude. "Thank you, Isabella. Your support means a lot to me right now." At that moment, something changed in their relationship. Grief brought them closer. Isabella began to visit often, helping Rosie in the shop, and looking after Maxim when Rosie was at the hospital with Victor. During the difficult days of waiting for the surgery, they talked a lot. Rosie told her about her life after leaving, how difficult it had been for her alone with a child, how Victor had come into her life and given her hope for happiness. Isabella listened, and Rosie's pain resonated in her own heart. Finally, the surgery was successful. Victor began to recover. Joy returned to Rosie's home. One evening, Rosie invited Isabella for dinner. Victor looked tired but happy. Maxim ran around the table cheerfully. For the first time in a long time, Isabella felt like part of this family. After dinner, Rosie said unexpectedly, "Isabella, Liam wants to meet us. He knows everything." Isabella felt a wave of anxiety. This meeting was inevitable. She didn't know how Liam would react. Liam's meeting with Rosie and Maxim took place a few days later at Rosie's house. Isabella was also present, feeling both guilty and hopeful. Victor created a calm and welcoming atmosphere, understanding the complexity of the moment. Liam entered Rosie's house with obvious nervousness. He looked intently at Rosie, then his gaze shifted to Maxim, who was curiously studying the unfamiliar uncle. Confusion, bewilderment, and a deep, still unacknowledged pain were visible in Liam's eyes. "Hello, Rosie," Liam said quietly. "Hello, Liam," Rosie replied. Is this my son?" Liam approached Maxim and knelt down, carefully examining his face. Maxim was a little shy but bravely looked Liam in the eyes. "My name is Maxim." "Maxim." Liam reached out and gently touched his son's cheek. You look a lot like me." A tense silence hung in the room. Isabella watched the scene with tears in her eyes. "Liam, please sit down," Rosie offered gently. They went into the living room and sat down. Maxim settled next to Victor, glancing at Liam with curiosity. I didn't know, Rosie. Why didn't you tell me?" Liam finally asked, a hint of reproach but no anger in his voice. "I was afraid," Rosie replied quietly. "I was afraid it would all happen again. Afraid you'd be caught between me and your mother again. I wanted to protect Maxim. Give him a peaceful life." Liam looked at Isabella. A silent accusation was in his eyes. "Mom, did you know?" Isabella lowered her head. "Yes, Liam. I found out recently. And I'm very sorry." Liam sighed and looked back at Rosie. "I understand you, Rosie. But, 10 years. I lost 10 years of my son's life." "I know, Liam. I'm sorry. But I thought it was for the best for everyone." Victor took Rosie's hand and squeezed it. "Liam," Rosie made her decision thinking of Maxim's well-being. "The most important thing now is to look to the future. You have the opportunity to get to know your son." Liam looked at Victor. He saw a sincere desire to help in his eyes. "Thank you, Victor." The conversation continued for a long time. Liam asked Maxim questions, telling him about himself. Maxim listened with great interest. Gradually, the tension began to ease. A glimmer of hope appeared that they could find common ground. After dinner, Liam approached Rosie. "Thank you for letting me see Maxim. I want to be a part of his life. If you don't mind." Rosie looked at Victor, who nodded encouragingly. "Maxim will be happy, Liam." At that moment, Isabella felt that the circle was finally closing. The past, full of resentment and misunderstandings, began to recede. An opportunity arose to build a new future based on forgiveness and love. However, one more important step remained. Liam had to talk to his father. Theodore had silently supported his wife and son all this time but had deeply grieved over what had happened. Liam went to his father the next day. The conversation was long and difficult. Liam told him about Maxim, about his feelings, about his desire to be a father. Theodore listened silently, sighing only occasionally. "I understand you, son," Theodore finally said. "Your mother made a mistake. She acted with the best intentions, but her pride ruined everything. But the most important thing now is not to repeat those mistakes. Accept your son. Accept Rosie. They are your family." His father's words were important support for Liam. He understood that he had to forgive Rosie and Isabella for the sake of his son. Several months passed. Liam began to visit Rosie and Maxim often. He spent a lot of time with his son, walking, playing, telling stories. Maxim quickly became attached to his father. The relationship between Liam and Rosie became warmer and more trusting. They talked a lot, reminiscing about the past and making plans for the future. Isabella also became a frequent guest at Rosie's house. She spent time with her grandson, helping Rosie in the shop. Gradually, the ice between her and Rosie began to thaw. They became truly close. One day, the whole extended family gathered at Rosie's house. Liam held a sleeping Maxim in his arms. Rosie sat next to Victor, smiling. Isabella and Theodore sat opposite them, watching this idyll. Isabella looked at Rosie and took her hand. "Thank you, Rosie," she said quietly. "Thank you for your generosity and wisdom. You gave me back my son and gave me a grandson." Rosie smiled in response. "It's all thanks to Maxim, Isabella. He's our shared treasure." Liam approached them and hugged both women. "We are family," he said. "And that's the most important thing." At that moment, Maxim ran up to them with a captured butterfly in his hands. Joy shone in his eyes. Isabella looked at her grandson and felt her heart fill with boundless happiness. Forgiveness turned out to be more than just a word. It became the key that opened the doors to healing and reunion. Decades of resentment were left behind, giving way to love, understanding, and family warmth. The story that began with pain and separation ended with the finding of true happiness, where everyone found their place and their forgiveness. And in this large, loving circle, no one remembered the bitter past, enjoying every moment of the present and looking to the future with hope.
Thank you for listening to my story.